On this special edition of The World Over, we'll be celebrating the canonization of two popes. Joining us with his thoughts on the soon-to-be saints John the 23rd and John Paul II is the Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, Donald Wuerl. And later, an encore presentation of my moving interview with former Secretary to Pope John Paul II, Cardinal STANISLAW CARY. Former Swiss Guard ANDREAS WIDMER will share his reflections on John Paul. And finally, we spoke to the stars of a film based on the Pope's life, two actors who played John Paul, Jon Voight and CARY ELWES, on the life of Karol Wojtyla. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Cardinal Donald Wuerl, STANISLAW CARY, ANDREAS WIDMER, Jon Voight, and CARY ELWES are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's program, send your tweet to Raymond Arroyo, or you can drop us an email at worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get started. On Sunday, April 27th, not one, but two popes will be raised to the altar of sainthood. My first guest is the Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C. He recently joined us to give us his thoughts on the upcoming canonizations of Pope John Paul II and John the 23rd. He's a member of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, as well as the Vatican's Congregation for Bishops. Here's my exclusive interview with Cardinal Donald Wuerl. Give me the significance, if you will, of the dual canonizations first, stepping back, of John Paul II and John the 23rd.
When you think of how well the Church has been served in recent decades, I think the Church has been well served over the centuries by the popes. But if you wanted to start marking clearly the Church, the conciliar and post-conciliar Church, then the bookends are John the 23rd, who called the council into being, really the father of the council, and John Paul II, who implemented the council. And I say that because when he was elected Pope, in the conclave when he was elected Pope, I had the privilege of being present at the Mass the morning after his election, but before he dissolved the conclave. He said in the homily to the cardinals, the ministry, my ministry as chief shepherd of the Church, will be the implementation of the Second Vatican Council. And Raymond, if you look at all of the things that he has written, if you start with his encyclicals and every one of those post-synodal apostolic exhortations, and remember, he called those synods into being, you have the implementation, the documented magisterial implementation of the council.
Tell me the lasting impact that John the 23rd has had on you personally, on your ministry, and on the Church.
I think the thing that I carry away from John the 23rd is not that he called the council, but that he could be, while being Pope, he could be an ordinary pastor of souls. He could be, you saw a priest standing there, you saw a happy priest, a cheerful priest. All those stories about his doing away with so much of the formality, and to me, that said a great deal. It said, remember, you're studying to be a priest, and a priest's job is to be a joyful messenger of the gospel. And wasn't that what he was?
Why is he a saint in your estimation?
I think John the 23rd is a saint because we talk about heroic virtue. I think when you read Journey of a Soul, when you read what he wrote, you see a life of heroic virtue. He truly tried to mirror in his life the gospel. I think that accounts for the joy.
Let's talk about Pope John Paul II. 129 countries visited, left an amazing impact, touched so many of our lives. I mean, he was really the only pope I recall. Give me your sense of the most important encyclical that he wrote, and I know you have done exhaustive studies of all of them.
If I had to pick one,
Right.
Redemptor Hominis, the very first.
Now, why?
Because I believe his entire program for his pontificate is contained in that encyclical. He begins by simply reminding us the faith is all about Jesus, the Redeemer of mankind. And what does that involve, and how does that unfold, and who is touched by all of that? And then you take a look at the rest of his 26 and a half years, and you see that lived out. You see it articulated in all the other encyclicals, in his apostolic exhortations. Remember, he takes on all of the issues. He takes on the questions, first of all, of the church, of priesthood, of formation for priesthood, of religious life, of the role of laity in the church, of bishops. And then he takes on the issues, truth, life. He takes on the issue of mission, everything that the council talked about. And then his encyclicals that deal with the social justice issues of the church. Everything the council talked about, he began to implement in light of the lived experience of the post-conciliar church.
Tell me about his implementation. There were so many firsts in John Paul II's pontificate. The creation of Divine Mercy Sunday, creating that moment, raising Faustina to the altars of the church. Tell me what that said to the church and its lasting mark.
Well, I think what he was saying to us, and again, now we're back to that very first encyclical, that our God sent Jesus Christ, his Son, to be our Redeemer. It's out of the loving mercy of God manifested in Jesus Christ that we're redeemed. And so Divine Mercy Sunday is just a repetition of that whole proclamation. And what a beautiful place for it to be. The resurrection of Jesus Christ on Sunday. And then during this entire period of solemnity after solemnity, recalling Christ is risen, Christ is truly risen, we say, yes, and his mercy makes it possible for me to rise.
Why would you say he is a saint and deserves to be?
I think there's such a compelling reason why those crowds were shouting Santo Subito. In his life, he demonstrated a love of Christ and a love of Christ's church. But it was in his death, it was in his dying that we saw the stature of this man. And we saw the love, the sanctity, waiting to go to the Father's house, but waiting for the Father to call him.
Yeah.
And all of the beauty of his ministry, I think, came to be seen in those last months.
Yeah, it was really incredible to be a part of and to watch it.
And to know this is the same person who, with all that vitality, stepped out onto the Sacrato of St. Peter's when he was 58 years old and said, "Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. Open wide your hearts to Christ." And at the end of his life, what were we seeing? He was saying, "I'm not afraid.
Right.
I've opened my heart to Christ." I think that's
as painful as it was, as difficult as it is.
And that's why people, all of us, could say, Santo Subito.
John Paul the Great.
John Paul the Great, St. John Paul the Great.
Donald Cardinal Wuerl, thank you as always.
You're very welcome. Good to be with you.
Excellent. As we prepare for the canonizations of John Paul and John the 23rd this week, I thought it would be a perfect time to revisit a special interview. Cardinal Stanislaw Dziwisz was the personal secretary to Pope John Paul II for close to 40 years in Krakow, Poland, where Karol Wojtyla was Archbishop, and later at the Vatican. He joined me to discuss his memoir, A Life with Karol, in which he discusses the spiritual side of John Paul, including a very moving discussion of the late Pope's death. Here is my exclusive encore interview with Cardinal Stanislaw Dziwisz. Tell me about those dramatic days in 2005 when His Holiness had to have a tracheotomy, had lost the ability to speak. That had to be very difficult for him.
To był trudny czas.
It was a difficult time, because every shepherd needs his voice, especially for this Pope, who was an actor in a certain sense, which means he worked with his voice. That was a great sacrifice on his part, just to lose his great predilection, his great ability to use the voice. I remember the last blessing at the St. Peter's Square. He really wanted to speak before, and he even made a serious attempt before to speak, but when he went to the window, he could not speak a word. He came back very sad. Then he said to us, if I cannot celebrate in public, that was Easter, if I cannot speak to the people, it might be better for me to die. But then immediately he added, may God's will be done. So he could speak to us with great difficulty, but he could speak. He asked for a piece of paper on which he wrote,
Totus tus.
never after he came back to this moment of great suffering. I think that these written words, totus tuus, were his last words, the last words he wrote.
This had to be a great suffering for him. I mean, after a life of so much suffering, to have this virile, active, outspoken pontiff suddenly silenced.
Wielkie cierpienie, ale to był człowiek.
Yes, he suffered a lot, but he was a man of a great faith as well. He was deeply convinced that his suffering was needed, just for the Church and for the world. We all can recall his words after the attempted assassination, that this suffering was needed by the Church. And this blood shed on St. Peter's Square was needed as well. Therefore, he received this suffering with great gratitude to God. He knew that through this suffering he could serve the Church and the world.
What is the lesson, the lasting lesson after a 40-year association and really a brotherhood and a fatherhood, a father-son relationship with this man? What is the lesson that he leaves for you?
Najgłębsza dla mnie lekcja.
The most profound lesson for me was being with the man who was totally dedicated to God. And this union with God, we all could feel. Nobody could speak about that openly, but we all felt it and knew it. We all knew that he was living with God and for God, and this radiated for all of us. The radiation from the other side. I repeat just what the others would say. His look was exceptional. The way he looked at other men was exceptional, and people up to this day remember this. He met the millions, but he always saw the particular man. He never treated man as a mass of people. He always saw a great worth in every man. And many times we had a contact just by seeing at each other.
I see that radiance that he brought to the world stage and that he brought to each life he encountered as an outgrowth of his spiritual life. You talk movingly here about his prayer life. Tell us what that was like.
Jak on się modlił?
How did he pray? Certainly he prayed with the texts, but that prayer always went into meditation. I can recall his stay in Krakow at the cathedral in Wawel. He asked during his stay there about the moment of prayer because he wanted to pray the breviary. And he completely transcended this situation. He turned off in a certain sense. Despite so many people were around, a lot of people, TV, the media, as if all of those people did not exist. He was just for God. And this provided a great lesson for all the priests present there. We just don't say the breviary, but we pray with it, we meditate on it. This took 45 minutes. It's really interesting that the journalists didn't know what to do during that time. So he simply left him in silence. Just the picture of the Holy Father on TV for 45 minutes. But this made a great impression. And many people still return to this picture of the Pope on TV who prayed. He would get up very early, always half an hour meditation, before the Mass, adoration, then the Mass, a meditated Mass. The liturgy is an activity, but for him it wasn't just saying Mass, it was acting the mystery. He would enter into the mystery of the Holy Mass, and of course after the Mass, the time for thanksgiving. If I can add, it was all the same during the day, later during the day. He always prayed all those whom he expected to come to see him, and after he saw them, he prayed for them as well. He thought that was the most important prayer. And it was much more important than simply a talking to people. Of course, he had a great devotion to the Stations of the Cross. During the whole year, he would pray the Stations of the Cross every Friday. And during Lent, he did it every single day.
Do you think he is a mystic? Many say he's a mystic. He had a mystical union with God, and he encountered and saw things that are denied the rest of us. You would know better than most.
Niewątpliwie to był mistyk.
Undoubtedly, he was a mystic. It's enough to read his poetry, the Roman triptych. This is pure mystic, and all the artistic forms he used. The predominance of the mystic content over the form. All the three parts of the Roman triptych are like that. Also, the Brother of Our God. There's a lot of mysticism in that poem. Brother Albert paints the picture of Christ, but he sees in him the poor man, the image of the poor man. And he was, of course, very young when he wrote that. Wojtyla tries to show the image of Jesus Christ in man, and he emphasizes that this image should be disclosed and shown beautifully despite all the weaknesses and sins. Also, I want to recall, just for the clergy here, the Holy Hour. Every Thursday, the Pope would make 1 hour of adoration. He would always go back to the fact that when Christ was going to the olive garden, he asked the apostles whom he brought with him, and then he makes this point to them that they could not last just 1 hour with him because they fell asleep. The Pope would always repeat that this is precisely what the Church lacks these days, this 1 hour of praying with Jesus in the olive garden. And he always tried hard to complement this missing 1 hour of adoration in the Church, to complement it with his own personal prayer.
I have one final question. In the Pope's will, he wrote, "I wish to follow him." And part of his instruction was to destroy all of his personal letters. You decided not to do so. Why not?
Zależy jakie pisma.
It depends on what kind of letters or papers you mean. In those letters we can find really profound contents. It would be very detrimental just to destroy all of this. What lacked the historical value, what lacked this value we destroyed, but we saved the rest. For example, every year he would make his personal retreat, and during his time he took the notes. There's a lot of spirituality in these notes. Just to destroy this expression of his spirituality, I simply could not do that. I didn't feel it power to do something like that.
Cardinal Stanislaw Dziwisz's A Life with Karol, My 40-Year Friendship with the Man Who Became Pope, is available at bookstores everywhere and online. And we will be doing extensive coverage of the canonizations all week, Friday through Sunday. Be sure to check EWTN.com for the latest, and follow me on Facebook and Twitter, and I will update you on the latest happenings in Roma. When we return, my conversation with a former Swiss guard about leadership and whom he calls its greatest model, John Paul II. Andreas Widmer joins us when The World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Strong leaders are certainly in short supply these days. But what makes a principled and moral leader? My next guest has some definite answers. He's a successful international businessman and entrepreneur. Before entering business, he served for 2 years as a member of the Pontifical Swiss Guard. He protected John Paul II. The experience led him to write a book, The Pope and the CEO, John Paul II's Leadership Lessons to a Young Swiss Guard. He's now the Director of Entrepreneurship at the School of Business and Economics at Catholic University of America. Here's my interview with Andreas Widmer. What makes a great leader, Andreas?
A great leader is a servant leader, somebody who has the goal of the organization, but specifically also the goal for every member within the organization in mind.
Let's move on to some of the topics you cover here and why you decided to write this book. Obviously, the person of John Paul II, the intimate stories and remembrances of him leap off the page. I imagine it was that close contact, seeing him, witnessing him up close, that led to this?
You know, that's what inspired my life, in my Christian life. I became, in that sense, a revert, a Catholic being there in the Vatican. But specifically, I wrote the book when, after a life, in my opinion, of privilege, of having access to this great saint of our time, I happened to be in Rome or in Europe right when he died. And within 24 hours, I was there being able to pay my last respects to him. And as I stood in front of him and paid my last respect, I prayed and said, you know, why do I have this privilege? Who am I? I'm from this small village in Switzerland. And the prayer was answered in a sense of saying, yes, why? What are you going to do about it? And what I'm going to do about it is share it.
You talk in the book about knowing God and the centrality of prayer, and so often CEOs and leaders of corporations, that's probably not a high concern on their to-do list. What did you witness in John Paul II? What example did you see that might help people understand the importance of prayer?
The greatest example I saw in John Paul is to bring the spiritual and the physical together. You know, that's the beauty of our faith, that it's not the spiritual is way up there and the physical is down here and you separate the two and one is bad and the other is good. No, Christ became man. We are saved, body and soul. So everything that around us in that sense is meant to be sanctified. So to bring the physical and the spiritual together, as John Paul beautifully does in the whole theology of the body, is really what struck me about him, that he prayed with the body and the spirit unified. And I think that's the core message of what I learned.
Is it true he used to pray in the chapel when he still had his physicality?
Prostrate.
In the morning?
Yeah. That's a beautiful thing he did. He also would write, you know, that's something I try to do now, and I recommend all the viewers to do this. If you have something important to do, why not bring it to the presence of the Holy Eucharist and go into the church? Bring your notepad. He would bring his notepad and start writing an encyclical right there. I mean, who better to be with?
Oh, gosh.
You know, than,
reminds me of Mother Angelica, who used to take her legal pad in the chapel and start writing her little books and things.
Exactly.
Very interesting. What did he teach you about, you mentioned it a moment ago, person-centered leadership, and tie it to your first Christmas in the Vatican, which I love the story from the book.
Well, my first Christmas in the Vatican, I try to describe that a little in the book. I was very distraught that day. I was serving at Christmas Eve, and I was just a mess. I just totally dissolved up there.
How old are you? 20 years old?
It's a long story. 20 years old.
20.
And I came to the Vatican not for religious reasons, but because I thought being a bodyguard is about the coolest thing that you could do. To a 20-year-old, I still think it is. And I'm up there and thinking, I made a mistake. What am I doing? I'm all alone here, and I'm up in front of the apartment. And then the commander called and said, he's going to come and use your exit. Well, I had been crying up there. And he comes out like 10 feet away from me. The door opens, and in this huge door, with his figure, with the white and the zucchetto, and he turned his head a bit and says, you're new, I've never met you before. And I said who I was and that I just started, that I'm a recruit. And he came over and shook my hand, and then our eyes met. And he noticed that I had red eyes. And he didn't ask anything. He just said, of course, this is your first Christmas away from home, isn't it? That was the wrong thing to say to me.
The waterworks came on.
Oh, the waterworks came on. And he just held me and just looked me in the eye and said, you know, I thank you for the sacrifice you're making tonight for us, for the church, and for me. And I'm going to pray for you tonight during midnight mass. What a gift that was. In the moment I connected with this man personally, it's only later that I realized that this is actually the Pope. and that this is the leader of 1 billion Catholics who has a couple of other things on his mind than that a young guard who's supposed to blend into the background is in front of his door and sad that he's not at home for Christmas.
Isn't it interesting? And you draw what lesson from that CEOs and leaders of corporations should take with them?
Would you, the parking lot attendant, the secretary, the person who picks up the phone, would you know what this person's state of mind is right now? When you walk by, do you know, do they have kids? What's on their mind? What's the problems that they're facing? What are their dreams? Where are they at, spiritually and mentally right now? Not as much of what you talk to them, but you being open to feel, to sense where they're at, to really be with them in that moment. That is something that is really a high ideal to live up to.
You make a point in the book about leaders having a strong, clear vision. Talk to me about that, how important that is to any endeavor, and the notion of clarity and being able to communicate that vision, and how John Paul exemplified that for you.
Having a strong vision is very important, not only because that's what you need for people to know where to follow you to.
Right.
It's, you need a vision. See, the vision stands up there for a leader so that the leader can convert and not coerce. A leader is supposed to convert, not coerce.
Coach, not criticize.
Coach, not criticize. The vision serves as this. Now, on the personal level, I think what is very important with the vision overall is, again, I talked earlier about the vocation and the ultimate end that we need to keep in mind. What I love about the Italian language is to say I love you in Italian is not I love you, it's ti voglio bene. I want your good. You see, and what we're called to do in love, to lead in love, is to want the good of everybody around me. So if I'm your employee, do you want my good, and how? And what is my good? What is that ultimate end?
Right.
Well, if we go back to the vocation and the universal destination that we have, we know what that good is.
Connect this to the economic crisis we've seen, where you have a detached leadership, certainly, where you have the leaders so removed from the people working for them. And some of these corporations, they just, the leaders become sort of cloistered away, and then you have the worker bees, and there's no real contact between the two.
A lot of this has to do with a lack of an integrated life, of saying that one principle applies in what you do at work and another principle applies what you do in your personal life. Living an integrated life, and it's a little bit, I think it's an effect of us separating the spiritual and the physical. In that sense that we have a company and we say, well, it's only business. But then we have to do some charity at the side. So that's the spiritual, it's the nod to the spiritual, and then we do the nod, and we say, but then for business, this is what we do. That's not an integrated life. If we have the same framework and the same goal in the personal life as we have in the spiritual life, this is not going to happen. This professor at St. Thomas University, a good pastor, he has a good way to put this. He says, as a business, we have to ask, are the goods that we provide truly good? Are the services we provide, do they truly serve? Those are the questions that we're not asking too often. And then people, I think it always comes down to the individual morality of the persons. There's no company makes a decision. This is you and me.
It's a human being.
I've been in in plenty of boardrooms. There's no such thing as a company making a decision.
I love John Paul's line where he used to say, when he was at the beginning, he wasn't quite certain, taking on the papacy is probably a big job. And he said, I suppose if the cardinals chose the boy from Wadowice, there must be something in the boy from Wadowice the church needs. And I think that's a wonderful way to sort of approach your vocation as well as your job.
I find, I read your book on Mother Angelica, and I was just really impressed, Raymond, in the parallels.
Yeah, there are a lot of them.
In the profound parallels in the two. And I think one of those is that the simplest and the most unlikely people, if they use their free will, and they act out of their free will with that vision of knowing where the ultimate destiny is, they change the world single-handedly.
The Pope and the CEO, John Paul II's Leadership Lessons to a Young Swiss Guard by Andreas Widmerer is available in bookstores everywhere. A movie based on the life of John Paul II premiered on U.S. and Italian television to great acclaim a few years ago. Academy Award winner Jon Voight and CARY portrayed John Paul at various times in his life. I spoke with both of the actors about how they prepared to play this soon-to-be saint and the effect it had on their personal lives. Here are the interviews. John Paul, according to some reports, wanted you to play him in a version of his life that he had penned in, what was that, the early 80s?
That's right, in the early 80s, and there was a piece that he had written, and they were going to make a film of it, and there were several people that were sent to him, you know, as possible fellows to play him, and he had approved me. The film was never made, and then all those many years later, you know, last year, I was called upon, you know, to play him again by a group, you know, this nice group, and I felt that his hand was on my shoulder, and he was saying, "Okay, go do it," you know.
At long last,
it's your
go
time.
do it.
Yeah.
And when the John Paul project came up, you thought what? Because this is intimidating. This man is such, he loomed so large on the world scene for so long.
Well, I was attentive to his papacy, obviously, and as everyone else in the world was, as a matter of fact. And when it first came to me, I thought, I got a phone call. I was looking in the mirror, and as I was hearing the words, I was looking at my face, and I was thinking, wow, I think I could do this thing, you know? There's enough similarity. So I said, well, maybe this is for me. And one doesn't think that something's going to come to you, as with Ben Kingsley had Gandhi,
Right.
and there was such a similarity. and occasionally those things happen, and this was a bit of a mark that it was meant for me to do. So I was looking at it, and then I heard then I started going over tapes of his voice and visuals from DVDs.
You didn't have much time to prepare, though,
Not
right,
too
John?
much time, no. But I'm very good at using the time.
I spent many, many times with this man. You are astounding in the role, in not only that you capture his physicality, which you have and you do. There are moments, though, John, where when you look up at the camera or you look at someone, there is this gentle kindness, this strong kindness, if you will, like a lion, that
right.
comes through in your playing of the
Oh,
role.
isn't that nice to hear?
And I mean, it's something of you too. I mean, I see that, but the way you
Yeah.
focus that, tell me a little more about the preparation. I know you read the encyclicals, the poetry. You obviously listened to the man because the vocal,
Yeah.
your vocal characterization is dead on.
Yeah. Well, I took sections of I looked through a lot of DVDs, and it was a wonderful journey. And by the way, listen, for everyone who's listening who is interested in this man, and I think he's an important man because I think he gives a continuous inspiration for us today in what we face. So his words are going to be very helpful to us. But to go back and look at the DVDs and appreciate what he did, if this movie does nothing but that, it would be very important that people go back and look at the original and hear his voice. Well, I did a lot of that, and I heard his voice speaking Polish, speaking Italian, speaking, you know, all these things, and and speaking English. And he had and his English, when he spoke it, was very strongly accented, but somehow very tasty. I mean, you liked it. You know what I mean? It was fun.
Yeah.
So. And then when I heard his voice, I know my voice pretty well, and I heard the notes. I said, I can be remarkably like him. My voice is in a similar pitch area.
Range, yeah.
The timbre is pretty much the same. So, I had the fun of playing around to see if I could get some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And when he was older, of course, he had Parkinson's. He had. His upper lip was paralyzed. He was having saliva in his mouth because, you know, he was starting to lose certain capacities, and it was very, very interesting. So I did a tremendous examination of the physical man. I must say, once I was doing it, there were things that happened, and those things that happened naturally because the preparation had been done were the fruits of all the labor. And they happened without real preparation. Like I remember, just in the scene where his friend, his childhood friend, says to him that, well, she gets flustered, and her husband says, well, you know, she didn't think you'd come back to Poland. And I said, well, oh, ye of little faith, and I hold her. And then she says this, she gets flustered, and I hit her in the forehead. Just a little touch. And it was so sweet. I don't know why it was.
But that's
it's just
him.
a love gesture.
Yeah, and he had that little impish, lovely way about him.
And it was so intimate and so. It was just. It evoked him for me. When I looked, I said, "That's him. That's not me." Every once in a while, I would catch something and say, "Boy, that's him." His love of people, of course, was quite stunning. I mean, he was comfortable everywhere with people, and people were comfortable everywhere with him, across all borders. And I think that was the most important thing of his papacy. Is that if I had to say one thing, I would say the most important thing is that he addressed people from all parts of the world, every culture, every religion. Everyone was moved by him during his lifetime, and when he passed, they missed him.
I'm a sportsman, and I've always been a sportsman. Now every step I take is like a knife.
Very few other portrayals of his life have managed to tap into his frustration, his human frustration, with the loss of the physical.
Yes,
you were very aware of that in the playing.
Yeah. This was in the script. I mean, there's no question this is in the script. But this was in the script because we found enough from our digging, and I have to say John Kent Harrison's ability. First of all, his ability to do a fellow who was a linguist, who was a world-class intellectual,
philosopher,
who was gifted spiritually, deep meditations, who was an actor, who was a poet, who was a sportsman, who was a
geopolitician, everything.
All of these things, right? A lover of nature. Yes, all these things and many more. And then he also was a warrior. He had fought the big tyrants of that century, and he had not been, defeated by them. He had crossed swords with the communists and with the Nazis, and he felt the responsibility of protecting his people from them, and he took that responsibility during that time. So when he came to the papacy, he was a warrior.
I wish to sing a hymn of praise to divine providence, which has allowed me to come home as a pilgrim. I, son of Polish land, I, John Paul II, I shout from all the depths of this millennium, I cry on the vigil of Pentecost, Lord, let your Spirit descend. Let your Spirit descend and renew the face of the earth, the face of this land.
To get all of that in, John Kent Harrison and I both, and Carrie as well, just immersed ourselves in this, in every piece of the history we could get, in every connection we could get. Some of it had to do with his friends, talking with his friends.
You met with Dziwisz?
People like yourself who knew him, and trying to get anecdotes, trying to get insights.
I was fascinated by it, and you mentioned it a little earlier. You said, I feel a bit like I'm a protector. What did this do for your faith personally?
Well,
you were
first of all,
Catholic.
it humbled me to be so, have such a ringside seat at a great life. But sometimes you get the idea that you're important in this business. Everybody thinks you're so important, And this was a person who really used every moment of his life to, to teach, to fight for justice and for the good, truth. He was an amazing man. So what it did mostly to me was it humbled me and pointed me in the direction. there was a director used to say to me, "Go there, John, go there." Well, it was like, it was a Russian fellow, but this was almost like John Paul too, you know, saying, if you want to really climb the mountain, there it is. Here we go.
I notice you wear the ring, the duplicate of the replica of the ring he wore. Why do you wear that?
Well, this was the ring that I wore during the filming, and it was a mark. I'm not superstitious, I tell you, at all. But I think everything is a sign. You know what I mean?
That's the Catholic in you coming out, John.
Exactly. That's it. But when I went through the costumes, I had very little time to do this piece. I had to use every hour. And the costume designer was a gal who was an Italian, and she was terrific. So then she said, "Let's try on the ring." She hadn't had my sizes. There was a ring, there was his ring, right, that they had duplicated, right? So, took the ring. I love the ring, it's an amazing ring. Just a very special, unique ring. No stone. Each pope has a different ring. This was his ring, the ring that he designed or approved, right? So I took the ring, put it on, perfect fit. And she looked at me, she said, "You see?
It's a sign."
It's meant to be.
Final question. What is the enduring legacy of this man, of John Paul, from someone who's so inhabited him?
Well, I would say many things, but one thing is I think that the legacy continues, that his words and prayers for all people can be called upon to give us strength and guidance. And I think that, you know, I have several books, and I keep them around, and I keep a little place in my house for all the John Paul II stuff, my work on it. And as I read it, I haven't read everything of his, but as I go back over it, I say, "Oh, this is valuable. This should be said now. This is important stuff." For instance, his addressing of all religions, gathering all of them. And he says, "We are the heroes of our faith, of moral guidance." You know, and he says, if we're going to be that, you know, in a sense, we have to clean ourselves out. He says, coming to us, he says, in a way, it's a penance. And we have to come together. If we don't come together, he's saying, you know, we will be destructive. You know, we must find a way, and we leaders have to provide that path. Wow, wonderful.
Yeah. Cary, first of all, tell me, when you were 18, you met John Paul.
Yes.
Tell me how that came about and what you took away from that meeting.
My mother took me to meet him at the Vatican, so I was incredibly thrilled at the prospect, of course. Had I known then that I was going to play him one day, I wouldn't have believed it. I was struck, first of all, by his incredible warmth and charisma, obviously. But I really felt like I was touched by grace. And I think that's true of most people that I've spoken with who had that privilege of meeting him. As I mentioned to you, I was struck by his extraordinary personality, but also his sense of humor. You know, he laughed. Somebody said to him, you know, he asked me, "Are you an actor?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, good, actors are good." And I didn't know back then that he was an actor himself, and I didn't make that connection. But years later, reading about him, I'm like, oh my goodness, the discussions we could have had, you know?
You are one of the rare Englishmen.
Yes.
Who come from a Catholic lineage. I mean, most of this was stamped out on the aisle. You come from this family of priests. Your great-grandfather, correct, was a papal aide, a chamberlain at the Vatican. How did this in any way shape your openness to playing the role?
Well, I was brought up Catholic. My mother was a convert, so all of her children were altar boys. So that really helped to shape my life in a very profound way, and obviously helped me with this role a great deal. And of course, I'm very proud of my Catholic lineage, and I felt like, hopefully, that my ancestors are looking down on me with a certain amount of pride, without being too proud.
That's okay, that's allowed.
Yes, but I think what really helped to inform me the most was actually having that, as I say, having that opportunity to meet him, which is very rare.
What did you think when you got the call? Because you're dealing with a figure who is so well known, and there are so many ideas in all of our heads of what he should look, talk, walk like. Was that at all, were you confronted by that when you got the request to play
Sure, when
the
I
role?
heard the news, when I got the call to play the part, obviously it was very daunting. I mean, this is a giant of a man who's, you know, cast a very large shadow, and as you say, was beloved by millions, literally. And so, you know, one hopes that one can do justice to the man, but I'm also aware that it's impossible to win everyone over. I think that, you know, when you're dealing with a figure of that stature, it's impossible to please everyone. And his life is so extraordinary that we really only had a very short amount of time to tell his story.
Yeah.
And his story is so immense that it was impossible to encompass every aspect of his life.
John had the great resource of all this footage.
Yeah.
And many of the moments that he played,
Sure.
he had access to. I mean, I remember watching some of these moments when he's talking with the kids. I mean, all of that is beautifully recreated here. You were at a bit of a disadvantage in that there wasn't the video.
Sure.
There were great pictures of him,
Sure.
and I have to say, the similarities are startling. When I watched the film, I have to say, when I first, they said, oh, Cary Elwes playing the puppet, I said, oh boy, this is not going to be, you know, I'm seeing the Princess Bride. You know, a little too dashing, come on. You were perfect. I mean, and your characterization is dead on. The vocal characterization that you captured. How did you approach the role?
Well, when I approached this role, I thought the best thing to do it was to take John's advice, obviously John Ken Harrison, and to call John VOIGHT, who was working in Canada at the time, and I was fortunate that I knew John. We'd worked together before, and so that helped us with a shorthand.
Playing nasty Nazis.
Exactly, it was ironic. And I called him and I said, you know, we should come up with some things that translate, that will make that transition for our parts, because he's playing the older one and I'm playing the younger version, seamless, and also to concentrate less on idiosyncrasies, but to get to the essence of the man, to really find the soul of him. And you know, it became apparent to us in our research that the essence of John Paul was not that he was a man of faith, but that faith was who he was. And that distinction really helped to clarify the man, because even with all the suffering that he went through, and this man went through an inordinate amount of suffering.
At a young age,
from the age of 8 onwards, you know. He was able to fall back on his faith to strengthen him in these moments, in these trying times. And that's profound, really, because many of us would probably have enormous doubts about our faith.
There were wonderful
if we were
little,
set, you know, if we were in these circumstances that he was
Your
in.
performance gives us wonderful little glimpses into that soul of this man, and in that, and I was telling John earlier, when you're working under this kind of timeline, a lot of it falls to the actor. I know it.
Right.
And I think a lot of these choices are yours. Those moments where you feel he's tempted to violence, particularly in the early part of the movie, because of the injustice around him and seeing friends and family, and how conscious were you of that and those little moments?
I'm proud to be Polish! I'm just as proud to be Jewish! What can I do? Nothing even God can do! I'm a Jew, Karol! A Jew!
It was about his humanity. He was a humanitarian at heart, which made him the most interesting, in my opinion, and modern pope. He was a man who, at heart, was probably the most troubled by man's inhumanity to man, because he had witnessed the worst kinds of inhumanity. Here, his own country was turned by the Nazis into their racial laboratory, and had close friends of his from his childhood in Wadowice sent to the gas chambers. And then after that, he suffered the totalitarian communist regime, which helped shape him into the political man that he became, the political figure that he became on the world stage, and helped to bring down communism. In fact, many people argue that he was instrumental in that. And I agree with that. I think extraordinary man, extraordinary man. And because all of his friends were faced with that choice under these regimes of whether to make the decision to fight, to go into the woods and join the resistance, he made a conscious choice to join an underground seminary and become a priest, even knowing that that could get him shot. So he chose love. In the face of hate, he chose love, and I thought that was extraordinary.
You said that this has allowed you to rediscover your faith.
Sure.
How so? How did the playing of this man do that for you personally?
Well, this film was a journey. I mean, all parts that you get to play are a journey, but this particular journey was an extraordinary one. Like I said, from start to finish, from meeting John Paul in my teens to finally playing him, it had a profound influence on me. I think it's impossible to study Karol Wojtyla, both the man and the Pope, and not have it have some effect on your life. I think you have to have a heart of stone to really not be affected by it. I was deeply affected by it. I was deeply affected by this journey. I went to his hometown. I visited where he lived as a boy, which is now a museum in Wadowice. I went to Częstochowa, where he worshipped a lot and laid his sash to where, when he was during the assassination attempt, he laid it there on the altar of the Black Madonna. I met friends of his, childhood friends of his. We met Archbishop Dziwisz, who was wonderful, wonderful. Really is imbued with the same Holy Spirit. We went to his ordination, which was extraordinary, in Wawel Cathedral, where we were given the privilege of shooting. And he is a really sweet man. He gave us some deep insights to John Paul. This journey has been one of enormous self-discovery for me, and really forced me to look at my faith in a way that I'd never done before. So I'm truly grateful for it.
Tell me a little bit about, you seem to be drawn to these historical figures and historical pieces.
Yeah.
Why do you think you're drawn to those, to period pieces and to historical pieces?
My father was had a great love for history and imbued that in us as children. I think that history was my favorite subject at school. I'm just fascinated by studying people in general. I think that's why I became an actor. I'm fascinated by what makes us tick. And I think that's why John Paul was so interesting, is that he spent his life trying to come to terms with humanity. And he made it his life's mission, really. And I think he was a prophet in many ways. I think that
Why do you say that?
Well, because he had a great fear that we are heading towards a culture of violence, or have headed towards a culture of violence. I think that he's been proven right in that respect, and that people have lost their spirituality. And I think that's a great pity, and I think if we have something we need to listen to this man. We really need to listen to what he had to say about us, about where we're headed into this new millennium. And are we headed towards self-destruction, or are we headed towards a more enlightened future. The choice is ours. You know, he said, "Be not afraid."
Yeah.
You know, we make the choices between good and evil. Doing nothing. If we do nothing in our lives, then evil will find a way to make itself known. But it's by our chosen actions that help define who we are, by doing good in the world, by helping others.
Nova Huta.
Yes.
The scene where you're out there in the field, and he puts the cross up, and they have mass out in that open field.
Gratias, agimus, tibi propter, magnam gloriam tuam, Domine Deus. Freedom to worship is a sacrosanct right of workers, all workers. And the fact that we are all here together demonstrates that this Catholic community is already a reality. As we stand here in the middle of Nova Huta, there is already a church.
That is the moment that, for me, you and the character become seamless.
Thank you.
Was that had you listened, how much time did you spend listening to him?
A lot.
To capture it?
I listened to him a lot. I walked around with a iPod with his voice in my head all day, pretty much, so that...
Speaking in English or Polish, or?
Both.
Ah.
You know, I had to learn some Polish songs. That wasn't easy.
Yeah.
I laughed with John Voight. I said, you don't have to sing any Polish songs in this movie. They gave them to me like the day before. They're like, Carrie, you need to sing this song tomorrow. You know, so I'd have to learn a Polish song phonetically, which wasn't easy.
What do you hope people will take from the film and remember of him?
I think his legacy is... my favorite quote of his that I think that stays with me is his quote about love. He says, love is what makes us good. It's what makes men and women come together and make a family. It's what makes us reach out and help others. And I think that's his enduring legacy, that he wanted us all to become compassionate, to become humanitarians, and to find our spiritual center. And I mean, what an extraordinary legacy that is.
Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are on my website, and I'll bring you the latest news and commentary throughout the week. I'll also be posting all kinds of goodies from Rome. So you can find me on Facebook and Twitter, and join us this week for EWTN News coverage of the canonizations of John Paul II and John the 23rd from Rome. I'll be joined by Robert Royal, Father Jerry Murray, Father Robert Barron, and some very special guests. I'll be anchoring the live event as well as World Over specials on Friday and Saturday. Joan Lewis and Brian Patrick will also be on site for some special broadcasts. Check EWTN.com for details and times. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. We'll see you in Roma. Bye now.